We're here in Washington, D.C. I'm Sharon Rubinstein, and I'm interviewing George Kronenberg on June 7th, 1998, for the Kindertransport Association. How would you spell your name?
My name is spelled Kronenberg, in Kronenberg. First name is George.
Where and when were you born?
In 1928, July 24th.
And where were you born?
I was born in Warburg, that's spelled W-A-R-B-U-R-G. It's in Westphalia, Germany. It's a small town. Most people ask me, well, where is Warburg? And the only answer I give after that is Kassel, which seems to be the largest city near Warburg. Warburg is a very small town.
About how many people were there?
I think it was population maybe like 15,000, something like that.
Was it rural?
Yes.
I see.
Yes, very much so.
Were you one of several children?
I have a twin sister. Yeah, a twin sister. She lives in New York, and we left Germany together in December of 1938. I think we were probably the second transport. I think the first one was December 2nd, and I left December 8th. And I left from Hamburg, and that boat ride, we actually went through Holland, the Hague of Holland, and the boat left from there to Harwich, England.
I'm going to take you back up to that day in a little while. That must have been when you were 10 years old.
I was about 9 years old. I was 9, I believe.
I see. Well, let's go back to the earlier years. It was a rural community, you said. How old were your parents when you were born?
How old were my parents? I think my mother was like 28, something like that. My father was probably around 31, I'm not exactly sure.
What were your parents' names?
My mother's name was Minna, M-I-N-N-A, and my father's name was Ludwig.
Uh-huh.
And like I said, there were just the two children.
And what was your mother's maiden name?
My Lowenstern.
Mm-hmm.
And she was one of three, actually one of 4 children, 3 girls and a boy. I happened to be named after the boy. His name was George, and he died natural causes when he was very young. So he had a condition of hemophilia, which I also have, which is hereditary. It's something that's passed on by the female. And so when he passed away, I guess they decided when I was born to be named after him.
Mm-hmm.
And
was your mother was she the youngest in the family? Where in the lineup?
my mother was the youngest, or well, actually not. This uncle was the youngest. My mother was the second, and then there were 2 other sisters. One of the aunts, the oldest one actually, lived in Hanover, Germany, and she survived throughout the war. She was not a Holocaust victim. She happened to be married to someone who was not Jewish, although my family, her family, was a very religious Jewish family, but for some reason, which I don't know, she married someone who's not Jewish. I never knew him. He died, I guess either before I was born or after, I'm not quite sure, but I never knew him. And this aunt, like I said, she went throughout the war. She was not interned in any camp or so forth. And as a matter of fact, my sister went to see her from the United States. She traveled to Germany to see her somehow I never got the opportunity to do that. Because in the meantime, she also passed away, natural causes.
And then your mother then was one of 3 surviving children. Was her family of long standing in your community?
As far as I know, yes. I mean, I guess the family goes back quite a long time. Not quite sure what the year was, but it was a well-established family in the area. And but unfortunately, like I said, most of my family, except his aunt, were killed in the Holocaust.
And how about your father's family?
My father was, let's see, there was a sister, and actually two sisters, and there were 3 children in that family. The sisters, they died natural causes, and let's see. One of the aunts went to Spain. I have two cousins from that family. One of them happened to be living in Cleveland, where I come from, and the other one actually also came to the United States. The brother of this one, and he was one that joined the American Army when he came to this country, and became an officer in the American Army. And he actually, after a few years, he went back to Germany and he stayed there. And he recently passed away, but we actually never heard from him after that.
After he returned to Germany?
Well, after he left the United States and went back to Germany on a permanent basis, he married somebody that was not Jewish, and he went back to Germany. Like I said, he stayed there.
I see. And you mentioned that your family was relatively religious, or at least your mother's family?
My mother's side was very religious. My grandfather was a cantor, and they were very religious. My father's side was so-so.
I see. Was there a family business on your father's side?
My father was a salesman for a textile company. I don't know the name of that. My grandparents, whom only knew my grandmother on my father's side, they also come from a very small village, not far from where I come from, and they had a business. I'm not totally sure what they all sold, but they had a store within their own home. It was a very large home, and they had a business in there. I think they sold almost anything, like
something like a general store.
Like a general store, yes. And one of the sister of my father, who actually was instrumental in bringing me to the United States from England, she was a pediatrician in Germany, and she married someone who happened to be affluent. He had his own bank in Hamburg, and they had no children. And so they left Germany in, I believe it was 1938. I'm not quite sure what part of the year they left, but they left in 1938, and they went to Switzerland with the idea eventually of bringing whatever family they could out of Germany, including my parents and one of the grandmothers. And but unfortunately that didn't happen. Although they, like I said, they lived in Switzerland about 6 months, and my aunt got tired of living out of a suitcase and decided originally they wanted to go to Israel, but that didn't happen, so they decided to come to the United States. And they happen to have some very good friends in Cleveland, Ohio, and since it was winter time and my aunt got sick and tired of traveling, she, when she saw Cleveland, decided that's where she was going to make her home. And so while I was in England, we did correspond, and eventually they asked us if we would care to come to the United States, my sister and I, and we said yes. And so in 1946, we came to Cleveland.
We're going to go back again. Did it feel like a close family when you were growing up?
Yeah, well, like I said, I was very young, and yes, my parents and my sister and I were a very close family. And my grandmother, we were extremely close, and I had one aunt, another aunt that I was very close with. As a matter of fact, I used to go on vacation there quite a lot. And so yes, it was a close-knit family. I mean, like I said, and this, my mother's side, being religious, were a little warmer, I must say, rather than my father's side.
Did you observe the holidays then?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
And did you visit with your relatives in other places, surrounding communities?
Well, we traveled a little bit in the area. Like I said, Kassel was nearby. We went to places like Dortmund, Düsseldorf, these towns. But that was probably about it. I never went to Hamburg until I actually left Germany. We left from there. This was after Kristallnacht, where my home was. Actually, at that point, my father, my sister, and I, we were at home. Kristallnacht. My mother was not there. She was visiting my grandmother, her mother, in Hanover. And during the night, like it happened all over Germany, they came and smashed every window in the house. And in the morning, my father was arrested, but they let him go after a couple of hours. And my father decided to go to Hanover, where my mother was. And we stayed there probably no more than 2 or 3 days. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was such a short time. And we went back to Warburg, and when we got back, my home was totally destroyed. There was not a stitch of furniture left. You know, it was just in ruins, totally. And this, of course, we could stay there. So that's when my parents decided to go to Hamburg, where this aunt and uncle lived. Also, my father's mother was in Hamburg, my grandmother also. So we stayed in Hamburg, I guess probably a week or so, I'm not quite sure exactly, but it was a little longer, and that's where the arrangements were made for my sister and I to go to England.
Well, let's go back a little in time. You said they came. Who was it who destroyed your...
The Nazis.
Okay, and were people from your town, from Warburg, involved?
Well, interesting you should ask that. Yes, I just found that out, that there was a school opposite to where we lived. And my wife and I went to visit Germany 2 years ago, and we were we met 2 people. One was the vice mayor of Warburg, and the other gentleman was an artist, quite a prominent artist. And we had tea or coffee with the vice mayor. And in talking to him about this night, he mentioned that the children from that school were involved in throwing, actually they weren't rocks, which I thought were rocks. I guess Warburg made sugar. and this was the raw sugar, like lumps of sugar, that was thrown through the windows by these children.
Were they part of Hitler Jugend, or was it informal?
I really don't know. My guess would be it was probably informal. You know, although, like I said, I mean, I saw these kids, the Hitler Youth, dressed up in uniform and all this kind of thing while I lived there, but didn't think too much about it, really. And but I didn't know exactly who was involved in throwing these lumps of sugar. I thought they were rocks that were thrown.
When this occurred, you mentioned that you found out 2 years ago that some of these children were involved.
Yes.
What was the Jewish population of Warburg?
It was a comparatively small Jewish community. I would say maybe just 200 or 300 families, not too many, because the whole town wasn't very large. There was a synagogue there, and to which my parents and I went on a weekly basis, which also was destroyed that night. But it was not a large Jewish community, it was not.
Did everyone in town, was it common knowledge that you were Jewish?
I don't know, I would say yes.
Did you live in a neighborhood that was particularly Jewish?
I don't think so. From what I remember, no. Because Warburg was divided into two sections. One was called New and one was called Old. And the synagogue was in the old section of Warburg. So my guess would be at this point that most of the Jews were more concentrated around that area. We lived in the what they call Neustadt of Warburg. As a matter of fact, we lived in a building that was originally the Jewish school. And in 1933, I guess Hitler did not allow Jewish schools, so the school closed. So at that point, somehow they converted that building into 3 apartments. And my family, we lived on the main floor. And on the second floor, there was a rabbi who, I remember teaching us Hebrew. We had Hebrew lessons right there. And then there was a third family that lived on the 3rd floor. And so I don't know exactly where, I mean, I went to public school up to a point. I'm not quite sure when that stopped. I can't remember that part. But it seems like we were not allowed to go to that school after a certain time, and we were educated primarily at home by this rabbi. And I think when I think about it, the 3rd family was also a teacher. And so this is how we were educated at that point. So as a matter of fact, when we went back to Germany 2 years ago, we went back to my home. I seem to remember.
Did you go with your sister as well?
I'm sorry?
Your sister?
No, she didn't go.
Oh, okay.
Just my wife and I went. And outside, I knew exactly, I told my wife I know exactly where the place was, and we went there. They changed the name of the street, but I recognized the house immediately. And on the outside, on the wall, there was like a plaque that was explaining that this was a Jewish school that was closed in 1933. So I remember the exact address. The number was a 8. I remembered on the house, and which was right there. And we went around. I went to the hospital where I was born.
Which was? Do you remember the name of the hospital?
No, I can't remember the name of the hospital. But we went there and we walked around. And as we were walking around, there was a person that came out of an office. And he was wondering what I was doing there, because we were both walking around, there was nobody else around. So I explained to him that I was born here, and I come from the United States now, but I'm from Germany, and he seemed very interested, and up to a point where he said whether he could drive us around and show us some of the sites, which he did. And,
About how old a man was he?
I don't know, he was probably in the 40s, I would say, somewhere around that. He was not really old, so he was not part of that generation that did all this, you know. But obviously, they're all knowledgeable. Even in my opinion, even if they try to deny some of it, they all know. But he was very pleasant, and he drove us around different areas and showed us the sugar plant and various other. He showed us where the synagogue was. The only thing that actually remained was the front door that was recognizable as a synagogue. It's now some kind of an office building. And also during that time, like I said, we were interviewed by the vice mayor, and it was interesting. One of the main things that stuck in my mind in talking to him is that he said that one of the most important things in Germany now is that they miss the Jewish culture. And that remark really stuck with me. I mean, that, because there's not one Jewish person living in the town. And so I thought that was kind of significant for him to come up with that remark.
How did it make you feel?
Well, I tell you, I felt kind of good about that he would come up with that kind of a statement. I did not expect, especially a person of his caliber, to come up with that kind of a remark. And I thought it was kind of an important statement for him to make, that he recognizes that something is really missing in Germany, such as the Jewish culture. And but in the meantime...
How old a man was the vice mayor?
He was younger too. He was probably in his late 30s, early 40s also, you know. And he was very cordial.
And you mentioned that your street was one name when you lived there and now a different name. What were the names of the street?
Well, originally it was called Männerstraße 8, 8 meaning 8. I don't remember what they changed it to. I can't remember that. But I know they changed the name because when we inquired into the street, although like I said, I was right there, I was practically there, but we wanted to make quite sure that we were on the right track, they told us the name had been changed.
Did you say Männerstraße?
Männer.
Oh, I thought it was like your mother's name.
No, it's spelled M-E-N-N-E-R.
Ah.
And so, like I said, we had no problem finding it because I knew exactly which direction to go. I mean, when we arrived in Warburg, I knew right away, I remembered the railroad station because I used to travel from there to visit my aunt. And like I said, I remembered the hospital, I remembered the school that I went to.
The public school.
Public school, which was right near the hospital. We also visited the Jewish cemetery, where my grandparents on my mother's side were buried, together with his uncle, after whom I'm named. What we had to do is, in order to go into the cemetery, we were told to get a key from a flower shop which was around the corner. And so we did this. We went there, and this lady gave us the key immediately, and we went there. And I found, because I used to go to the cemetery when I was young, my mother used to take me. And I remembered more or less where the graves were. And I did find them, and I found it in comparatively good condition. I was surprised to see the cemetery in the condition that it was. And also, one of the things that is still a little bit of a puzzlement as far as I'm concerned is there were these 3 headstones of my grandparents and this uncle, but underneath there was a new stone which had all the information on there about my parents. And I mentioned it to my sister, and she said that she was instrumental in having that done. You know, so as a matter of fact, I never really knew the first names of my grandparents because we didn't refer to them by first name. So I only knew them as Oma and Opa, right? And I didn't know the ages. I didn't know when my parents got married until I saw it on that stone, and which was kind of an emotional thing for me to find out. Also, it mentioned the year my parents were murdered by the Nazis. I believe it was 1944. That was on the stone also. You know, so that was, like I said, a little bit hard to take to find out at this point.
You say that the key to the cemetery was kept in a flower shop. Do Germans who live in the community ever go to the cemetery, do you know?
I don't think so. I think primarily visitors that come to the town, because really there's no Jewish family living there anymore. So I would think people like myself who just come to visit, who are from that part of the country, I would imagine they're the ones that would go and visit the cemetery. Not only that, but another interesting aspect was that outside of the cemetery, which was kind of walled in, they had a large metal plaque which had all the names of the people that were murdered by the Nazis. I found my parents' name, I found my aunt's name on this plaque. As a matter of fact, I took pictures of it. I have it at home, and which was also kind of surprising that the city did this. So I would imagine there are quite a guilt feelings, and so this was something that I didn't expect to see either, to see all these names from that town on this particular wall.
Do you know who keeps it up, the cemetery and the other things?
Well, my guess would be that the city is doing that. Because since there are no Jews living there, and everything seemed to be in a comparatively good order, so I would say the city is taking care of this.
Do you remember your relationship with the other children in the public school and with non-Jews when you were a child?
I'll tell you, I was somewhat of an introvert as a child and didn't really mingle all that much with the rest of the kids. So far as name calling or that kind of thing, that I don't remember of hearing that, you know. So I didn't have any real friends from the school per se. I know there were 1 or 2 other kids that we played around with, but they were Jewish. We had no Gentile friends. I mean, just, you know, so that's kind of a relationship between children.
Did you feel Jewish as a child?
Oh, absolutely.
Very
much so.
Did you look any different than the other children?
I don't believe so. No, I don't think so. I mean, like I said, we observed all the holidays. We went to the synagogue. And we observed, you know, Passover, all these things we did. So, oh yes, I knew definitely that my Jewish background.
Was your health an issue in your childhood?
Well, not that seriously, because I have a hemophilia condition. The only thing that I remember as a child, I used to have quite a bit of nose bleeding. And that seemed to be my major problem. I didn't know that I was a hemophiliac until I came to England.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an episode in England where I had a problem. I went to the dentist. And in England, they seem to pull teeth very readily, more so than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I went to this dentist and he pulled a tooth. And I lived in a hostel at that time. And for about a week, I bled. And I didn't say anything until one morning I just fainted. And then they rushed me to a hospital. And I was in the hospital for a month.
Mm-hmm.
And with all kind of transfusions and all this kind of thing. And that's when I found out that I have a condition called hemophilia. I never knew that. I never knew the name. I just knew that I had a bleeding disorder. And but other than that, like I say, I always call myself a borderline case. And I don't have any real serious problems otherwise with this condition.
Tell me a little bit more about your transition to homeschooling.
Well, let's see. I went, of course, in Germany, I went to public school.
Mm-hmm.
And until they decided that Jews couldn't go there anymore. But when I came to England, first when I came to England, not knowing the language, we went, actually I landed in Harwich. From there I went to London with my sister in a hostel. And I was there about 6 months when they decided to make that hostel in London just for girls. So all the boys, and there must have been about 10, 15 of us, we went to a town in Margate, which is the southeast corner of England. And there I went to a boarding school. And as a matter of fact, we wore a regular uniform with a cap with the RH, was called Broughton Hall. And there I learned English. When the war broke out, then we were evacuated inland.
I think we've jumped ahead, though. I was actually referring to your experience in Germany when you went from the public school to being educated in your family home.
Yes.
Because you were no longer allowed to go to school
Right.
in Germany,
Right.
in a public school.
In public school, right. Well, there I kind of don't remember all that much about that, except that the teacher that lived in the building, we had lessons, my sister and I, we had almost like private lessons
Mm-hmm.
at that point, until the time we left.
Did you feel fear or any other strong sense of anxiety or other emotion when these changes were occurring?
Not really, not that I can remember.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed to be sort of a kind of a natural thing, because like I said, we were like 8, 9 years old, so not really.
And how about your parents' state of mind? Did you notice any changes?
No, not really.
How about your father's career? You said he was a salesman
Yes.
for a textile company. Was it a Jewish concern, or was it?
That I don't know.
I
don't
see.
know. I know very little about that, other than that he used to travel. He was away for 1 or 2 days at a time,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew that he was involved with textile,
Mm-hmm.
and that's really all that I really knew. My mother did not work,
Mm-hmm.
so that's.
You mentioned that you had a warm family relationship with your mother's relatives.
Yes.
Was the environment at home fairly warm and happy?
Oh yes.
I see.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
And anyway, when you were then being educated at home, it was with your sister.
Yes.
Was she given the same education as you?
Absolutely.
Did you feel, was that something progressive, that your sister would receive the same kind of?
Well, actually, it was, you're just beginning your fundamental education,
Mm-hmm.
and we were both the same age,
Mm-hmm.
so we were learning the same things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it No, it didn't affect us in any which way.
I see. Now, you mentioned that on the night of Kristallnacht, you were in, I believe, either Hanover or Hamburg.
We left the next day for Hanover.
I see.
After, in other words, that night, once they smashed all the windows, the next morning, after my father was released from the police station or wherever they took him, we went to Hanover, to my grandmother.
Was that an important turning point for you? Did you become, was
Well,
it a surprise or a shock?
Probably more shock, because, suddenly we were afraid of what had gone on. And we found that, at this point, what is going to happen? We didn't really understand fully what was all going on there.
Where
because
were
my parents
you?
never explained to us the Nazi era or what was going on. We never really talked about it. I saw as a child, I saw the German army in their armored cars and all this kind of thing going through the street, but it was never told us, or that, maybe it was intentional, so we shouldn't feel afraid of what was going to happen, and so it was sort of a, I don't know, it just seemed to have happened, We realized that something was wrong, that we couldn't stay there, and of course once we came back to Warburg from Hanover and saw the place totally demolished, at that point we were not told that we were going to leave Germany. This all happened once we went to Hamburg. And because, like most of us, we probably were told, like parents would tell us, that we will follow shortly afterwards.
Your parents told you that?
That's right. And we were also told that we had someone in England who was a brother to my uncle who brought us from England to America. He had a brother who lived in London. And that he would sort of look after us in the interim, although he was not married and he had his own business, but he came to visit us on weekends in the hostel in London. And also throughout my 8 years in England, we were in constant contact with him. So we called him uncle even though he really wasn't. So we always hoped that our parents would follow. As a matter of fact, if the war in 1939 would have started, let's say, a month later, according to my parents, to whom we were writing constantly, were ready to come to England. But the war started and they were not allowed to leave.
Had they made preparations in terms of
leaving?
Yes.
Well, they wrote to us that they had their lifts all arranged for whatever they had to be sent to England, and but that never came to be. That never happened.
I see. Do you remember? Did your father, by the way, have the opportunity to work after Kristallnacht?
I really don't know that. I don't think so, but I really couldn't tell you.
And
I don't know. As a matter of fact, I know very little of what happened or how they even lived, and for some reason we never asked that question. Because when we left Hamburg, my parents and this cousin with whom lives in Cleveland were at the station to send us off, and never asked this, what happened to them after we left. Where did they go? I mean, where did they live? I never knew that. I knew we wrote to one another, but we never delved into where they lived or how they lived.
And they didn't say?
They didn't say, But in asking my cousin, I think they must have lived in Hamburg afterwards. They didn't go back to Warburg. They lived in Hamburg. How? I have no idea.
Was your cousin about your age?
He is 6 years older than I am.
I see. So he was about 15 when, and did he leave Hamburg with you then?
No, he did not. As a matter of fact, he and his brother and mother, I think his father had passed away already, went to Spain. And he met someone in Spain, and he got married there. And this aunt and uncle in the United States brought both my cousins over to the United States.
But your cousin was with you at the station,
Yes.
and your parents were with you.
Yes.
Was this about a month after Kristallnacht, did you say?
Yes, because this happened in the Kristallnacht was in November, and we left in December.
I see.
So these arrangements seem to have been made very quickly.
Do you know how your parents were aware of the transports?
I don't know how, but from what I understand, it was done through the organization, I think it's called House, and also, I can't think of the other name, in London, where they worked together with these two organizations to get us out of Germany.
And do you remember what it was like to be on the platform with them or at the station?
Well, I mean, there were quite a number of children that went on this train, and it happened so quickly that we no sooner got there, we were on the train and my parents left.
Did they say anything particular to you before you got on the train?
The other thing that I seem to recollect is that they would tell us that they would come shortly afterwards. This kind of thing, you know. And the train ride from Hamburg through Holland, I remember that it stopped at various stations, and there were people at the stations that would give us candy, chocolates, and this kind of thing. And once we arrived at the Hague of Holland, because this was in the evening, and we were transported on the ship. And one of the things that struck me funny was, in Germany, you know, we had these feather quilts in bed. Here there were these blankets, and they were all tucked in, which I didn't know. I had no idea how do you get into bed. You know, to undo this, all like a hospital bed. You know, this I never saw before. So that seemed to be something that stuck in my mind because it seemed kind of unusual. And then when we arrived there,
were your sister and you separated?
No, we were together.
So even
we traveled together.
You traveled together, and at night when you slept, there was no division between girls and boys?
I don't believe so. I think we were in the same cabin or whatever, bunks what we had.
How did the two of you feel? Were you excited, anxious, upset? Did you derive any comfort from each other?
From each other, because my sister and I were very close. And like she says to this very day that she kind of took care of me. I mean, she was like protective kind of individual, I guess. Although we were the same age, you know. And even when we arrived in England, we were in Dovercourt and it was freezing. It was in these little wooden shacks. It was, and we were together. They had bunk beds, and we stayed there. I'm not quite sure. I would say a number of weeks.
What did you bring with you on the?
Very little. I mean, just the bare essentials, few clothing, except, you know, you were not allowed to bring anything of value. And but I did bring a watch that was supposed to have been given to me on my 13th birthday, bar mitzvah. And I stuck that watch in my sock. I was not searched. I have that watch at home. It still works. This watch belonged to my grandfather, so it's got to be about 100-some years old. And that was the only value kind of thing that I had, except the few things we were allowed to take. I guess there was a list that my parents had to check off of what we were allowed to take. So I don't think we had big suitcases that I can remember. No, we didn't.
Did you have pictures of your family?
I have, yes, not very many, but I do have. I have one picture of my parents and an aunt, which was just a very small photograph, which I enlarged not too long ago in Cleveland, and I framed it. I have a little larger frame. I have a few other pictures of my parents at home, but I would say maybe I don't have more than 3 or 4 pictures.
Did you, are you a person who has a good memory for faces, and do you remember the people?
I have a good memory for faces, but names I'm not so terrific with, but faces I do remember.
So the people who you knew in Varberg and your family, is it easy for you to call up the way they looked? And
Yes, yes.
So when you got to England, it was cold. You were with your
It was freezing, absolutely freezing.
Were you awake? When the boat docked, were you awake?
Oh yes, oh definitely.
Do you remember seeing the cliffs or the shoreline?
No, I can't say I do, but I remember getting off the boat and being transported to this camp, and we were housed in these wooden huts, and there was a sink, I can see that in front of me right now, where the water froze, you know, from when you try to turn on the faucet, the water wouldn't come out, it was frozen, and in order to keep warm, they had these hot water bottles that were made out of stone, which we, you know, they poured water in there, and that's how stuck those in the bed to keep the bed warm. And I don't think you ever knew that. And then we lived like this, like I said, for a number of weeks. Then every Sunday, I remember English people used to come to this place, and they used to pick out whom they wanted as far as being taken into their families. My sister and I didn't want that. We used to hide from this because we didn't want to be in a family at that time. I guess we were content just being there until my uncle, parenthesis, came to visit us, and he said he would make arrangements for us to come to London. And so my sister and I went to London, to a hostel, and I stayed there a few months, and there probably were about 30 of us, roughly, and then decided to make this particular hostel a girls' hostel. So the boys, we went to Margate, which is in the southern portion of England, and we stayed there until the war broke out.
And that was the first time you were separated from your sister?
Yes, at that time.
How did you feel about that?
I wasn't too keen on that, but I had no choice. They made a decision, this is what was going to be. And as a matter of fact, once I left there, I hadn't seen my sister for 6 years. She left London, I guess, once the war broke out, and she was also evacuated inland. And although I had an address, we did correspond, but I never saw her. She never saw me for 6 years.
And at what age were you separated?
Probably like 9 years old, 10 years old. Probably 9 years old at that point.
Was your quote-unquote uncle keeping track of her as well?
Oh yes.
I see.
Oh yes. I mean, he actually, while I was in London, he used to come visit us on weekends, and he used to take us out. And as a matter of fact, he always used to tell us if we want to take a friend along, we could choose a friend to come along, and we did. And and he would take us out to a restaurant or this kind of thing. I mean, he really was, he did kind of try to look after us, you know, throughout our stay in England. And even when I was living in other areas, there were times when we were able to go to London. We would spend a weekend with him. He had an apartment. He was single. And so we would just stay just for the weekend, and then he would take me back to where I was. And so.
But you and your sister could never coordinate to be in London at the same time?
No, because I don't know, she lived under very difficult conditions from what I understand. She never really discussed her way of life, and I only found out about maybe 2 years ago. My sister lives now in New York, and we were able, she started to talk about some of the things that she experienced, which were very unpleasant. And I have to say, the conditions I lived under were a whole lot better than her conditions. And the only reason that we came back together was that after this episode with my tooth extraction, and I guess I was pretty sick, she was contacted and she came to visit me, and they had a living at a hostel in Birmingham, and they made arrangements for her to remain there. So she left this family that she lived with, and she came to Birmingham. Since I didn't live too far from there, it was decided afterwards that I too would go to Birmingham, and that's where we were reunited.
And that was at the age of about 16?
That was at the age about, about 16. That would be about right.
And that would have been in 1944? Or?
Yes, because I left in 1946. Yes. And she was already working. She worked as a hairdresser at the time in Birmingham. And I was more fortunate. I went to school. They sent me to first a technical school. And after a year they decided that maybe that was not the right thing because of my hemophilia condition. And I went to a commercial college.
When you say they...
the hostel.
Okay, you were in hostels the entire time you were in England?
I was 2 years with an English family. And
when was that?
That was probably about 1944, 45, something like that.
So after you were already
16? 44.
No, it was before.
It was before that, actually. So it had to be before that.
Okay.
I lived with an English family for also 2 years. As a matter of fact, when people asked me, where did you stay? I said, I stayed no more than 2 years at any one place. So I stayed 2 years with an English family, a place called Aldridge, which is a small mining town not far from Birmingham. And as a matter of fact, we had, again, we were lucky. There were a number of Jewish boys that went to that area. We had Hebrew lessons every weekend. A teacher came from Birmingham to this little village, and we had Hebrew lessons. We had services Friday night, and these people that we stayed with, they were very understanding. Obviously, they didn't object us doing this. They were not Jewish, and this family took in 2 boys.
Do you remember their names?
The name was Bailey. The last name was Bailey.
Did you ever keep in touch with them after?
No, I didn't. I know that a lot of the people, like myself, got very close with their families, those that lived with families. As a matter of fact, some of them adopted them as families. Somehow I could never do that. I never felt that I was part of the family, you know? And although, like I say, the people were very nice to us. They were, we were not mistreated or anything, that kind of thing. And when the decision was made for me to go back into a hostel, they did not object. So it was.
How was the decision made? By whom?
I think by the people from Birmingham. They decided that after I was actually bar mitzvah, that after I got sick, that I'd be better off, and especially since my sister came to join me to be reunited. So I went to Birmingham, where she was, and we left from there to come to the United States.
Now, you said that you initially, after your period of, when you came to England, you were in that gathering place, which was very cold.
Dover Court.
Dover Court, okay. And where you hid, so as not to be picked up by a family.
That's right.
Right. Was England strange to you at that time?
Well, I would say yes, because first of all, I didn't know the language. And here I was surrounded by people that all spoke German. And I probably felt more at home in that environment rather than going to a family that didn't understand me and I didn't understand them. So I guess that was probably the reason that I didn't want to be put into that kind of a situation.
Did you speak any English?
No.
I see.
I started learning English when I went to Margate. That's where I really started learning English.
When you got to Margate, you must have been a little older than 9.
Well, not much more, maybe 10, but no more than that.
And did you go to school?
Like I said, yes. In Margate, like I say, was a boarding school. And there we had English lessons until up to a point when I decided that I was ready to go to public school. And I started going to public school. As a child, you learn a language very quickly. And obviously, I think I learned it very quickly. And once the war broke out, since we went to a public school, I was evacuated with all the kids from that particular school inland, because we were right on the coast. So right along with a lot of English kids, we were evacuated inland.
To where?
To a place called Bonny Hay. This is where I went to the English family. And but like I said, there were a number of us. We all lived nearby. Like they would say, you two stay with this family, and another couple stay with another family. We were all living very close to one another, since it was just a small village. And so we had friends just among ourselves.
Do you remember any of the names of your friends, and have you kept in touch?
Well, there were a couple of brothers. The name was Heinemann. We were very close friends. And as a matter of fact, the Heinemanns, their parents were saved. They were in Theresienstadt. So were my parents at first. For some reason, somehow, they were able to leave. And they came to the United States. They came to England, rather, excuse me. And I guess the father must have passed away, I'm not quite sure. But the 2 boys, Heinemann boys, and the mother came to the United States. And I was more friendly with the older boy. He was a year older than I, and the other brother was a year younger than I. And we were very close friends. And they eventually, like I said, came to the United States. The older one, unfortunately, died some years after he came to New York. And the other brother, he lives in Philadelphia, and he is a doctor in Philadelphia to this present day. We're not really in contact. I'm not in contact with him really, and I must say it's probably partly my fault that I'm not the greatest correspondent. So, as a matter of fact, I think he came to the first reunion in England, and I think we communicated by letter once or twice since then, but he hasn't shown up at any of the other reunions, and so we're really not in that closer contact. And
were there other people as well who you became?
Well, the fellow that I lived with, of course, with his family, he eventually went to Israel. And when we went to Israel, my wife and I, we went to visit him.
Your wife is here, by the way.
Yes. And unfortunately, he was very sick in Israel, and I believe he had cancer, and he died not too long ago.
What was his name?
His name was Kurt Penner. Landis, excuse me. There were two Kurts. One was Kurt Penner, one was Kurt Landis.
Did you make any friends among the English boys or English girls, for that matter?
No.
So you kept fairly...
Very much, yes, in my own circles.
You had said that you were more introverted than your sister, or you said you were introverted when you were a
Yes,
child.
yes.
Was that something that continued in England?
I think more or less. I was always much more of the quiet type. I think I got out of my shell in my later years, where one of the reasons probably that I became more of an extrovert or out of my shell is when I came to Cleveland. I used to like to sing. And I was told at one point, why don't you take some vocal lessons? And there was a chorus in Cleveland, Jewish chorus, and they said, why don't you join that chorus? And so I decided, okay, I will try and take some lessons. I was introduced to a teacher from the Cleveland Institute of Music, which was quite a prominent school, and I went to this teacher's home for an audition, and he says, okay, you can register as a student at the Institute, and I took lessons for 5 years. I joined this chorus, and I think that kind of got me more out of my shell, because I sometimes